Hello. Today I will be reading The Fundamental Principles of Communist Production and Distribution by the Group of International Communists, 1930. A translation of Grundprinzipien kommunistischer Produktion und Verteilung by the Dutch Council Communist Group van Internationale Communisten, translated and edited by Mike Baker. Published by the Movement for Workers' Councils, London, 1990. Marked up by Jonas Holmgren for the Marxist Internet Archive. And I'm pretty sure down here there's a few comments. Yep. Okay. Fundamental Principles of Communist Production and Distribution is the classic exposition of the economics of communism, and indeed, apart from the first outline sketches given by Marx in his critique of the Gotham program, upon which the book is based, the only one ever to have been produced. The first working draft was the work of the well-known German proletarian revolutionary and veteran member of the KAPD, Jan Appel, alias Max Hempel. This draft was subsequently revised and completed in Dutch by a collective composed of members of the Group of International Communists of Holland, GIC, and published in German by the Allgemeine Arbeiterlichen Deutschlands, General Workers' Union of Germany, in 1930. It does for communist society what Marx's Capital did for capitalism, and is perhaps the most advanced intellectual achievement of the German Revolution. The economic preconditions for communism are shown to reside in the abolition of wage labor, money, and all value-determined production and distribution, and their replacement by a system of use-value production regulated through the average social hour of labor. One of the most remarkable features of the work is the clear and profound treatment given to the process through which the lower stage of communism progressively, quote-unquote, abolishes itself in achieving a transition from the lower to the higher stage of communism. The collapse of state socialism in the USSR and Eastern Bloc lends a very considerable significance to this historic document of the German and Dutch revolutionary movement. In its pages, communists, socialists, and libertarians today may discover the basic flaws in the economic system laid down for the USSR by Lenin and the Bolshevik Party. Thanks to this work, attention is focused on the apparently so simple but so easily overlooked fact that the Bolshevik system of state socialism rests upon no objective model of social regulation whatsoever, and consequently is dependent upon the subjective diktat of an army of major and minor bureaucrats which, as the ruling elite, organized in an all-powerful party dictatorship fused in with the state, effectively deprived the mass of the working population of all control over the economic process. It is this which formed the economic foundation for the horrendous tyranny with which the world had for so long been familiar, just as it also revealed the Bolshevik system to be a false model of socialism or communism which misled the world for over 70 years. Comment. As the translator's introduction makes clear, the following text represents an advance on the theory of the post-capitalist economy as posited by Marx. One of the many strengths of the text is the insistence throughout that for any non-exploitative system to actually work, all participants must understand its economic foundations, as well as making redundant the economic expert of the old capitalist system. The post-capitalist economy also undertook to make redundant that penultimate twister, charlatan, and sycophant of the rich, the politician. To this end, the many levels of bureaucratic job creation schemes for the middle class of the old society were to be abolished, and the only mechanism between the desires of the people and the practical necessities required to fulfill those desires was to be the Workers' Council. The Workers' Councils were to be everything the present parliamentary system is not. The people's voice was to be taken at literal value through the Workers' Councils situated in the workplaces and neighborhoods. Representative spokespeople could, if they distorted or manipulated the decisions of the council, be recalled and instantly dismissed. Unlike the pampered parliamentary snakes and misrepresentatives of the people of the present capitalist system, the economic system of the communist society would automatically delete from its ranks of delegates the power seekers, the leeches, the money mongers, and the layabouts that constitute in total the parliamentary benches of today. Quite how this is done is also a rewarding aspect to the close study of this text. This edition of Fundamental Principles of Communist Production and Distribution is taken directly from the first English translation of the German text by Mike Baker, deceased, of the Movement for Workers' Councils, a London-based group founded in 1989 and now long since de-established. A printed edition was published, but issues of poor quality and the inclusion of extraneous and irrelevant material has made this virtual publication a necessity. We wish to encourage some debate upon the crucial need to take seriously questions surrounding the whole nature of the post-capitalist economy in wider society. Despite the tendency of the following text to generate more problems than it attempts to solve, this is more indicative of the non-proscriptive thread of argument rather than any fundamental flaw. Leaving such thorny issues, such as those which are honestly dealt with by the authors of Fundamental Principles, to future generations, or to some magical and loose hypothesis which supposes all such matters will come right in the end, is, in effect, a dereliction of revolutionary responsibilities. To ask the workers of the world to vanquish capitalism into the historical realm of barbaric societies, there must be at least an idea of the new society worth fighting for. And that's the comments on page. In a place of a preface, which I'll read that first, and then one state, Communism, or the Association of Free and Equal Producers. In place of a preface. The following work, the fruit of a collective study by the group of international communists, reveals in its structure such a strongly integrated unity of content that it is possible to speak here of a really positive collective effort. The adoption of the collective method of work in drafting the text, which proves in practice what results can be achieved by a consciously motivated group, is just one of its qualities, which is of such great and enduring value. With this work, the group of international communists have put forward for debate for the first time in the post-war history of the working class movement, the practical possibility of ordering social production and distribution on the basis of a use-value economy. They have brought together all the experience accumulated as a result of earlier attempts by theoretical representatives of the working class of a previous era to solve this most ultimate and conclusive of all areas of the revolutionary theory of the proletariat, in order that the root causes which in the final outcome render all those earlier efforts scientifically untenable may be laid bare and so prevented from generating further confusion. On the other hand, taking as its starting point the established principles of scientific communism and combining these with such of the work of previous authors as has been to any degree positive, the work simultaneously reveals new social relations and economic interconnections which in their totality establish the economics of communism upon a firm scientific foundation. It concerns itself not only with the necessity for economic transformation and construction in the sphere of industry, but also reveals the necessary links with the agricultural economy. In this way, the authors provide a clear insight into the internal interconnections in the law-given mode of development characteristic of the entire economic organism of the growing communist society. The simple language and the clear methods of analysis employed, which are understandably understandable to every class-conscious worker, ensure that every revolutionary who diligently studies the following pages can also fully grasp their content. The clarity and disciplined objectivity of the writing likewise open up the possibility of a broad arena of discussion within the working class movement, one which can draw into its orbit all the varied schools of opinion represented within its ranks. Since we counsel communists also, within our own ranks, must subject the possibilities projected here to the most thoroughgoing discussion, we reserve for a later date, the final expression of our standpoint towards the exposition which follows. There is one wish, however, which we would like to extend to this text to help it on its way. The work Fundamental Principles of Communist Production and Distribution will have proved its success finally and for all time when all revolutionary workers have consciously read through its pages and brought the accumulated experience contained therein in practical application in the struggle for the victory of the proletarian cause, the victory of communism. The struggle is hard, but the final goal is worthy of it. Berlin, 1930, General Workers' Union, Revolutionary Factory Organization of Germany. And yeah. Chapter 1, State Communism or the Association of Free and Equal Producers. 1. State Communism. The attempts made in Russia to construct a communist society have introduced into the field of human practice a sphere which previously could be treated only in theory, at least as far as industrial production was concerned. Russia has attempted to order economic life according to the principles of communism, and in this has failed completely. The fact that wages no longer increase to correspond with the rising productivity of labor. Footnote 1. Heinrich Rollenholst, Klassenstreit, Class Struggle, 1927, page 270. And footnote continuing. Provides sufficient evidence of this. A greater degree of productivity achieved by the system of social production brings with it no commensurately greater share in the social product. This indicates that exploitation exists. Heinrich Rollenholst proves that the Russian worker today is a wage worker. One may try to make light of the matter by referring to the fact that Russia is still an agrarian country, and that private ownership of land still exists, and that because of this, the very basis of wage labor necessarily imposes itself upon the whole economic foundation of social life. Whoever finds this explanation satisfactory may indeed be perceiving the economic foundations of present-day Russia in an objectively correct light, but in respect of the gigantic attempts of the Russians to implement a communist economy, that person has nevertheless learnt nothing. It is for this reason that doubts have arisen amongst many proletarians concerning the method which is being applied by the Russians, and which it is supposed will lead to the establishment of communism. It is a well-known method, which in a few words may be summed up as follows. The working class expropriates the appropriators and places control over the means of production in the hands of the state, which then proceeds to organize the various branches of industry and places them as a state monopoly at the disposal of society. In Russia, matters developed in such a way that the proletariat was able to take command of the factories and to continue running them under its own management. The Communist Party, as the sovereign wielder of state power, then issued directives according to which the factories were to link together their workers' councils, Soviets, at communal, district, and gubernial county level, in order to unite the whole of industrial life into one organic unit. In this way, the productive apparatus was built up out of the vital energies alive in the working masses. It was an expression of the drive towards communism which lived in the proletariat. All forces were directed towards the centralization of production. The Third Congress of the All-Russian Economic Council took the decision, quote, Centralized administration of the people's economy is the most certain means in the possession of the victorious proletariat for achieving the most rapid development of the productive forces throughout the whole country. It is simultaneously the precondition for the socialist construction of the people's economy and for incorporation of the smaller enterprises into the unified economic structure. Centralization is the sole means for avoiding any tendency towards a fragmentation of the people's economy. Footnote 2. A. Goldschmidt, Die Wissenschaftsorganisation Sowjetrusslands, the Economic Organization of Soviet Russia, page 43. And footnote, continuing. In just the same way as, at the commencement of this development, the essential element in the situation lay in the fact that control over the management of industrial production was in the hands of the masses. With an equally inexorable compulsion, was it inevitable that at a later stage these powers would be transferred to the central administrative organs. If at first the directorates, communal councils, etc., were responsible to the masses of workers, the producers, in the end they became subordinated to the central administration, which directed the whole. At the beginning, responsibility from below; at the end, responsibility from above. It was in this way that in Russia a gigantic concentration of productive forces, as no other land on earth had ever attempted, was carried through. Woe betide that proletariat which is compelled to struggle against such an apparatus of power. And in spite of all, this is the reality which has overtaken Russia. There can now be not the slightest doubt. The Russian worker is a wage worker, a worker exploited. These workers must struggle for their wages against the mightiest state apparatus the world has ever known. The fundamental point to which we would draw attention here is that in the case of this form of communism, the proletariat has no control over the productive apparatus. In the mere formal sense, it is the owner of the means of production, but it nevertheless has no right of disposal over them. Precisely what proportion of the total social stock of products that the producer may receive in return for the work performed is determined by a central administration which, if everything proceeds according to plan, determines this on the basis of statistics. In reality, the decision as to whether or not exploitation should take place is vested in a central authority. Even in the case in which a benevolent administration is in command, which then distributes the products in an equitable way, it remains nevertheless an apparatus which has elevated itself over the producers. The question then becomes one as to whether this state of affairs has come to pass in Russia on account of the special conditions prevailing there, or whether in this case we have a characteristic feature typical of each and every central administration concerned with production and distribution. Should the latter be the case, the possibility of establishing communism would become very problematical indeed. 2. Varying Marxist opinions. With the single exception of Marx, we find in the case of virtually all writers who have concerned themselves with the organization of economic life in a communist society, the same principles being advocated as those which the Russians have applied in practice. In this, they base themselves upon the well-known dictum of Engels, quote, "The proletariat conquers state power, and as its first act proclaims the means of production to be state property," end quote. Footnote 3, quote, "The proletariat conquers state power and proclaims the means of production to be state property," end quote, Engels. And footnote, and continuing, they then set about the task of centralization, and begin to construct organizations of a similar type to those which the Russians have called into being. Thus, for instance, writes Rudolf Hilferding and Otto Neurath, names which could be extended by a whole series of other experts, quote, "Exactly how, where, in what quantity, and by what means new products will be produced out of the existing and man-made means of production is decided by the social commissariats of the socialist society at national or local level. It is they who mold with conscious intent the whole of economic life, utilizing for this purpose all the instruments at the disposal of organized production and consumption statistics in accordance with the needs of the communities as they, the social commissariats, have consciously represented and formulated them. End quote. Footnote 4. R. Helferding, Finance Capital, translation, T. Baltimore, page 28. And footnote continuing. And Ruff expresses this even more clearly. Quote, the science of the socialist economy recognizes only one single economic master, society itself, which, without reckoning of profit or loss, without the circulation of any form of money, whether it be precious metals or labor money, reflecting an economic plan, organizes production without the aid of any unit of accounting, control, and distributes the means of life according to socialist principles. End quote. Footnote 5. Neurauf, Wissenschaftsplan und Naturalschung, Economic Plan and Accounting in Kind, page 84. And footnote continuing. Anyone can see that they both arrive at the same kind of social structure as that erected by the Russians. Even if we assume such structures are actually viable, a fact which we deny, and that the central administration and the organs of social control would be willing or able to distribute the mass of products in an equitable way in accordance with the accepted differing standards of living. Even then, and even if we assume that the myriad economic exchanges involved occur smoothly, the fact would still pertain that the producers have in reality no right of control over the productive apparatus. It becomes not apparatus of the producers, but one placed over them. Such a state of affairs can lead to nothing other than the forcible suppression of groups which, for whatever reason, come to adopt a position of opposition over and against the administration. The central economic power is simultaneously the political power. Every oppositional element which, in respect of either political or economic affairs, wishes to arrange matters differently to that willed by the central administration will be suppressed with all the means at the disposal of the all-powerful state apparatus. It is certainly not necessary to give concrete examples of this. They are already familiar enough. In this way, the association of free and equal producers proclaimed by Marx becomes a prison state such as humanity has never before experienced. The Russians, no less than all the other theoretical schools, call themselves Marxists and, of course, proclaim their theory to be true communism. In reality, however, it has nothing to do with Marx. It is a bourgeois economics, a capitalist administration and control of production projected in communist terms. The historical perspectives of the Bolshevik tendency are expressed in the fact that they have observed how, already under capitalism, the production process becomes subject to an ever greater degree of socialization. The free producer of commodities is hemmed in on every side by trade unions, trusts, etc. Production is indeed already quote-unquote communist. Quote, the overcoming of capitalist modes of thought as an incipient social phenomenon presumes the carrying through of an all-embracing process. It is highly likely that socialism will first of all establish itself as an economic order, so that socialists will first be created through the socialist order, and, not conversely, the socialist order through the socialists. A sequence which, furthermore, stands in complete harmony with the basic ideas of Marxism. End quote. Footnote 6. Neurauf, same source, page 83. And footnote continuing. Should it be the case that the economy has become quote-unquote communist, in this way, it is necessary only that the production relations be transformed in such a way that the means of production become state property, and then, quote, a socially planned regulation of production in accordance with the needs of the community and of each individual takes the place of the anarchy of social production, end quote. Footnote 7. Frederick Engels, Anti-Dering, Part 3, Foreign Languages Press, Peking, 1976, page 361. And footnote, continuing. On the basis of this plan determined control, they then construct their system further. In order to bring the plan to completion, it is necessary only to install a new management in charge of the capitalist production apparatus, and communist society is there, ready-made. This perspective of communism, according to which the proletariat only needs to place a new management in charge of production in order that, with the help of statistics, this will then arrange everything for the best in the best of all possible quote-unquote communist worlds, derives its basic origin in consciousness from the fact that the type of economist or sociologist whose brainchild this is unable to conceive of the growth of planned production as an aspect of the development of the working masses themselves, but can conceive of it only as a process which they, the economic experts, are called upon to carry through and complete. Not the working masses, but they, the leaders, are destined to guide the bankrupt capitalist system of production into communism. It is they who have the knowledge, they who think, organize, and order. The sole role which the masses have to fulfill is to endorse which they, in their wisdom, have decided. Towering above the mass of working people stand the economic experts and leaders with their science, looked up to in reverence by the masses as the custodians of a temple of social marvels which remains closed to them. Science would then be the possession of the great men, from whom the light of the new society beams out. Needless to say, in this form of society, the producers have no control or administrative power whatever over production, so that the picture thereby painted represents a strange version indeed of Marx's concept of the association of free and equal producers. All plans of this kind bear clearly the birthmarks bestowed on them by the period of history in which they have been born. In this case, the epoch of the development of the mechanical sciences. The productive system is conceived as an intricate mechanism which functions through thousands and tens of thousands of gears and cogwheels. The various parts of the productive process function integrally with one another in much the same way as do the separate yet interdependent partial functions of a production belt, like those found in a modern factory, for instance, Ford. Here and there stand the controllers of the production apparatus who control the operation of the machines by means of their statistics. These mechanical plans have their origin in a fundamental error, namely the idea that communism is primarily a matter of the ordering of organizational technical processes. In reality, the fundamental question is an economic one: how the basic relationship between producer and product is to be determined. It is for this reason that we say, in respect of this mechanical conception, that it is necessary to find the foundation which will enable the producers themselves to construct the edifice of production. This act of construction is a process which proceeds from below upwards and not from above downwards. It is a process of concentration which is fulfilled by the producers themselves, and not in such a way as if manna from heaven were to fall upon them from above. If it is our wish to take the experience of the revolution to heart and to follow the guidelines given us by Karl Marx, it is even now possible for us to make appreciable progress along this road. 3. Nationalization and socialization. Although no one has left us with a detailed description of a communist society, the adoption of the viewpoint of Karl Marx, that this new model of social production would in essence be an association of free and equal producers, and would come into being quite independently of the theories of social democrats or even communists, seems a reasonable one. It is not the state which is conceived as being the leader and administrator of production and distribution, but far rather it is the producers and consumers themselves to whom these functions would fall. The reformist school has in the course of years turned this theory completely upside down. The struggle for social reforms and the steady transformation of the various branches of industry into state or municipal enterprises meant for them a steady approach towards communism. Wherever capitalist development had brought any particular branch of production to such a degree of concentration that it could function as a unitary structure under central administration, then this would indicate that it was ripe for nationalization. Whilst reformist social democracy conceived of realizing communism through a continuous and gradual process of nationalization, the revolutionary Bolshevik tendency considered that a revolution was necessary in order to complete the process of nationalization. Thus, the conception of the men from Moscow is based on fundamentally the same theoretical methods as that of the reformists. During and after the revolution, those industrial units which have become ripe for nationalization will be operated through the state, whilst that part of the economy which is not yet sufficiently concentrated will remain in the hands of private capital. The Russian Revolution proceeded according to this scheme. In the year 1917, the producers in Russia began to expropriate the owning class throughout the whole economy, with the intention of ordering production and distribution according to communist principles. The process of expropriation began from below, to the great discomfiture of those who wished to lead and administer the economy from above. It was in this way that the Russian economic administration returned to their former owners many factories which had been expropriated by the workers, because they were considered not yet sufficiently quote-unquote mature for communist administration. The first All-Russian Congress of Economic Councils thereupon decreed the following decision, quote, in the sphere of the organization of production, it is necessary to introduce final measures of nationalization. It is necessary to move forward from the implementation of nationalization measures for separate enterprises, so far as 304, to the consistent nationalization of industry as a whole. Nationalization must not be a matter of occasional expediency, and must be carried out only by the Supreme Council of People's Commissars, with authorization by the All-Russian Congress of Economic Councils. End quote. Footnote 8. A Gotschmidt Die Wirtschaftsorganisation Sowjetrusslands, the Economic Organization of Soviet Russia, page 42. And footnote, continuing. Here we see quite clearly the difference between nationalization according to the social democratic ideal and the actual communist conception of socialization. In this, we also see the distinction between industrial enterprises which are considered already ripe for communism and those which are not, a concept of which Marx apparently would never have dreamed. F. Oppenheimer has very correctly observed in this symposium edited by H. Beck on Methods and Aims of Socialization. Quote, delusion gains ground that the Marxist concept of socialization is being promoted step by step through the widespread characterization of nationalization or municipalization of individual and industrial enterprises as a form of socialization. It is for this reason also that an otherwise incomprehensible and mysterious emphasis is placed upon quote-unquote mature enterprises. For Marx, however, socialist society can become mature only as a whole. Separate industrial establishments or branches of such establishments can, according to him, just as little become mature and ready for socialization, as the separate organs of an embryo in the 4th month of pregnancy can become mature and be delivered to lead an independent existence. End quote. Footnote 9. F. Oppenheimer, quoted by H. Beck, Sammelbuch über Weg und Ziel der Sozialisierung, Symposium on Methods and Aims of Socialization, page 16 to 17. Quote, what then becomes apparent is that this nationalization can only lead to the construction of state socialism, in which the state emerges as a single vast employer and exploiter, end quote. Footnote 10. Panicock on socialization in the New Times, 1919, page 534. And footnote continuing. The aim, however, should be not to restrict the energy of the masses who themselves carry out the process of socialization, but to incorporate them as living cells into the whole organism of communist economy. A development which, in its turn, becomes possible only if and when the appropriate general economic conditions are present. The creators of use values are then able themselves to integrate their factories into the overall sphere of social production, and so to determine the basis of the relationship of the producers to the social product. The only writer who, as far as we know, tries to speak the truth on matters of this kind is the reformist H. Konau. He says, quote, in the last analysis, it is nevertheless Marx's intention, in opposition to the Cobden school, that a fixed control of the economic process should be applied. Not, however, through the state, but through the unification of the free associations of the socialist society, end quote. Footnote 11. H. Konau, Die Marxische Gesellschafts- und Staatslehre, Band 1, The Marxist Theory of History, Society, and the State, Volume 1, page 30. Continuing, in the section on, quote, the negation of the state and state socialism, end quote, Konau shows us how German social democracy came to desert this standpoint only gradually. At the beginning, the movement opposed those tendencies which wished to bring large undertakings such as railways and mines under state administration. One example will suffice. On page 340 of the above-mentioned work, we read how, in an article, W. Leibniz expounded the view. Quote, it is intended gradually to nationalize one industrial enterprise after another. In other words, to replace the private employers with the state, to continue capitalist industry only with a different exploiter. It, the state, appears as employer in the place of the private employers, and the workers gain nothing from this, although indeed the state has strengthened its powers and its means of repression. The more bourgeois society comes to realize that it cannot defend itself forever against the tide of socialist ideas, the more do we approach that moment at which state socialism is proclaimed in real earnest, and the last battle which democracy has to fight out will be waged under the slogan, quote, forward to social democracy, forward to state socialism, end quote. Footnote 12. W. Leibniz, Staatssozialismus und Revolutionäre Sozialdemokratie, State Socialism and Revolutionary Social Democracy, quoted by H. Konau in Die Marxische Gesellschafts- und Staatslehre, Band 1, The Marxist Theory of History, Society, and the State, Volume 1, page 340. And footnote continuing. Konau then demonstrates that this standpoint was already abandoned before 1900, and in 1917, K. Renner declared, quote, the state will become the lever of socialism, end quote. See Marxism, War, and International. Konau is in full agreement with this, but it remains to his credit that he makes it fully clear that all this has nothing to do with Marx. Konau makes it a matter of complaint against Marx that he made so sharp a distinction between state and society, which, in his view, does not exist, or at least is no longer a valid concept. With their practice of nationalization, according to quote-unquote mature industrial enterprises, such as has been implemented in Russia, the Bolsheviks have in reality given Marxism a slap in the face. Indeed, they have thereby transferred their allegiance to the social democratic concept of the identity of state and society. In Russia, this practice is already making its results felt in the most oppressive way. Society does not hold control over the means of production and the production process. These are in the hands of the ruling clique, which appoints and administers everything. quote-unquote, in the name of society, Engels. Now, that is to say, they are in the position to suppress by hitherto unprecedented means each and every group or individual attempting to oppose a new form of exploitation. Russia, which should have been an example of communism, has by this means developed into the ideal of the social democratic future. We have dwelt at somewhat greater length upon this type of nationalization in order to show that this has nothing in common with Marx and that Marxism is in fact compromised thereby. It was especially after the experience of the Paris Commune that the view began to gain ground with Marx that the organization of the economy could not be realized through the state but only through a combination of the free associations of the socialist society. With the discovery of the precise forms by means of which the proletariat organizes itself for a revolutionary class struggle for the conquest of economic and political power, the workers' councils, the historical foundations on the basis of which the society of freely associating producers must be historically constructed, are brought to light and fully revealed for all to perceive and comprehend. 4. The average social hour of labor. Marx therefore took his stand upon the concept of, quote-unquote, the association of free and equal producers. This association, however, has nothing in the least to do with the vague concepts of mutual aid, which are currently circulating, but has a very material basis. That basis is the computation of the labor time which is necessary in order to produce use values. As will be demonstrated in the course of this text, this has nothing to do with value. That this was also consistent with Engels' viewpoint can be seen from the following. Quote, society will be able to calculate in a simple way how many hours of labor are contained in a steam engine, a bushel of the last crop of wheat, or 100 square yards of cloth of a specific quality. It could therefore never occur to it to go expressing the quantities of labor put into the products, quantities which it will then know directly and absolutely, in yet a third product, in a measure which, moreover, is only relative, fluctuating, and inadequate. Though it was formerly unavoidable as an expedient, rather than express them in their natural, adequate, and absolute measure, time. End quote. Footnote 13, Frederick Engels, Anti-Dering, Foreign Language Press, Peking, 1976, page 402. And footnote continuing. Marx also very clearly indicates the labor hour as the unit of computation in his well-known discussion of, quote, Robinson on his island, end quote. He says of this island inhabitant, quote, necessity itself compels him to divide his time with precision between his different functions. Whether one function occupies a greater space of his total activity than another depends on the magnitude of the difficulties to be overcome in attaining the useful effect aimed at. Our friend Robinson Crusoe learns this by experience, and having saved a watch, ledger, ink, and pen from the shipwreck, he soon begins, like a good Englishman, to keep a set of books. His stock book contains a catalogue of the various objects he possesses, of the various operations necessary for their production, and finally, of the labor time that specific quantities of these products have on average cost him. All the relations between Robinson and these objects that forms his self-created wealth are here so simple and transparent that even Mr. Sedley Taylor could understand them. End quote. Footnote 14, Karl Marx, Capital, Volume 1, Penguin Books, page 170. And footnote continuing, quote, let us finally imagine, for a change, an association of free men, working with the means of production held in common, expending their many different forms of labor power in full self-awareness as one single social labor force. All the characteristics of Robinson's labor are represented, but with the difference that they are social instead of individual. End quote. Footnote 15, Karl Marx, same source, page 171. And footnote continuing. We see here that Marx, in his quote-unquote association of freely associating producers, conceives in exactly the same way of a computation of labor time, and indeed on the self-same basis of the labor hour. Where, however, Marx has set his freely associating producers in place of Robinson, we now see that we can just as readily place a system of social bookkeeping which communism places at society's disposal to arrive at the following paraphrase of Marx's text. Quote, its stock book contains a catalog of the useful objects it possesses, of the various operations necessary for their production, and finally, of the labor time that specific quantities of these products have on average costed. All the relations between the members of society and the objects that form their self-created wealth are here so simple and transparent that anyone could understand them. End quote. Marx assumes the system of social bookkeeping to be, in general, applicable to a production process in which labor is social. That is to say, it is equally applicable whether communism is still at an early stage of its development, or whether the principle, quote, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, end quote, the higher stage of communism, has already been achieved. In other words, the organization of economic life may, in the course of the various periods of development, move through various stages, but the stable basis for all of them nevertheless remains the unit of average social labor time. That Marx did indeed understand the matter thus is, for instance, apparent from the fact that he is at pains to demonstrate with special emphasis that distribution can assume various forms. Neurath infers from this that Marx has posed a question in such a way as to suggest that we have a free choice as to how the products are to be distributed. A strange error indeed for such a quote-unquote Marx expert, who surely must know that Marx knows nothing of freedom in this matter, but only of functionally derived organic necessity. Freedom of choice in respect of a system of distribution is circumscribed within the limits set by the structure imposed through the system of production. Nevertheless, this is subject to certain modifications, which will be discussed later. Quote, all Robinson's products were exclusively the result of his own personal labor, and they were therefore directly objects of utility for him personally. The total product of our imagined association is a social product. One part of this product serves as fresh means of production and remains social, but another part is consumed by members of the association as means of subsistence. This part must therefore be divided amongst them. The way this division is made, all will vary with the particular kind of social organization of production and the corresponding level of social development attained by the producers. End quote. Footnote 16, Karl Marx, Capital Volume 1, Penguin Books, page 172. And footnote continuing. If taking this as his basis, Marx was very well able to provide the fundamental category determining, in a communist society, the method of economic regulation and accounting control applicable in the sphere of production. In the case of the sphere of distribution, he demonstrates this purely by way of example. Thus he writes further, quote, we shall assume, but only for the sake of a parallel with the production of commodities, that the share of each individual producer in the means of subsistence is determined by his labor time. Labor time would, in that case, play a double part. Its apportionment in accordance with a definite social plan maintains the correct proportion between the different functions of labor and the various needs of the associations. On the other hand, labor time also serves as a measure of the part taken by each individual in the common labor, and of this share in the part of the total product destined for individual consumption. The social relations of the individual producers, both toward their labor and the products of their labor, are here transparent in their simplicity, in production as well as in distribution. End quote. Footnote 17, Karl Marx, same source, page 172. And footnote continuing. Marx also reveals elsewhere in his text that he conceives labor time to be the basic category of the communist economy. Quote, with collective production, money capital is completely dispensed with. The society distributes labor power and means of production between the various branches of industry. There is no reason why the producers should not receive paper tokens permitting them to withdraw an amount corresponding to their labor time from the social consumption stocks. But these tokens are not money. They do not circulate. End quote. Footnote 18, Karl Marx, Capital Volume 2, Part 3, Chapter 18, Penguin Books, page 434. And footnote continuing. If it is individual labor time which is to serve as the measure for the product to be individually consumed, then the mass of products must also be measured according to the same yardstick. In other words, the products must have impressed upon them how much human labor power, measured in time, how many average social hours of labor they contain. This assumes, however, that the other categories of production, means of production, raw and auxiliary, materials, etc., have been measured according to the same scale, so that the entire system of accounting control for production in the separate industrial establishments must be based upon the average social hour of labor. Then one can with all justice declare, quote, the social relations of human beings towards one another, both as regards their labor and the products of their labor, remain here simple and clearly understood, in production as well as in distribution. End quote. Thus we can see that Neroff is in error when he assumes that production and distribution have so little connection with one another that we can have, quote-unquote, free choice. Quite the contrary. If Marx adopts individual labor time as the measure determining the individual share in the product, then by this means he simultaneously lays the basis for the relationship between producer and product, according to which the foundations of production are also determined. Let us now return to the question as to whether or not a system of planned use value production such as would be expressed in an organically integrated economic apparatus, of necessity must lead to a system which raises itself as an alien force over the producers. We say no. In a society in which the relation of the producers to the social product is directly expressed, this danger does not exist. In every other social formation in which this principle does not pertain, the system of production must finally and inevitably develop into an apparatus of oppression. 5. Towards the association of free and equal producers. In the form of its system of production, humanity has created an organism designed to satisfy the needs of tens of thousands of human beings. In the course of their production, we use up both our own labor power and the production process itself. Seen from this point of view, the process of production is simultaneously a process of destruction, a process of the using up of resources. Nevertheless, through this very process of destruction, we continuously create new use values. That which has been consumed is born again in the same process. Machines, tools, our own labor power are simultaneously renewed in this process, are produced anew, or reproduced. It is an unremitting stream of reformed human energy changed from one form into another. Each specific form is crystallized human energy, which we can measure according to the time during which labor is expended in order to create it. The same yardstick applies to that part of the production process in which no physical products are created, such as, for instance, education, the health service, etc. Here also means of production and labor power are expended, in which cases the product simply takes the form of the instruction received, the care given to the stick, etc. Distribution takes place directly in and through production itself, and the expended energies flow in their new form directly into society. Because of the fact that we are able to measure these energies in time, a fully exact relation between producers and product is established. The relation of each individual producer to each specific social product is in this way rendered wholly and clearly perceivable. In the case of the organization of production according to the schemes of Neurath or Helferding, or as it is implemented in Russia, this relationship is, on the contrary, completely concealed. Here it is a process veiled in mystery, and the producers themselves certainly know even less about it than the state administrators. In this case, therefore, a definite proportion of the social product must be allocated to the producers by a superior authority, and the former must await trustfully that which they are to receive. This is how matters proceed in Russia. Although productivity may rise, although the mass of social products may increase, the producer nevertheless receives no increase in the share. That is to say, exploitation exists. What should the producers undertake against this? Nothing? Yes, indeed. They must take up once again the cause of struggle against the exploiter, against those who hold control over the system of production in their hands. One may attempt to place quote-unquote better leaders in power, although this of course does not lead to the removal of the causes of exploitation. In the final analysis, there remains no other road forward than that of reconstructing the entire system of production in such a way that the exact relationship of the producers to the products fashioned by their labor becomes the foundation of the social system of production. In such a system, however, the task of the leaders and administrators in respect of the allocation of the products is also eliminated. There remains nothing to allocate. The share in the social product is determined directly. Labor time serves as the measure of determining the proportion of the total product to be individually consumed. The question as to whether or not the proletariat, in the course of a communist transformation of society, succeeds in establishing this relationship between producer and product, is in the final instance a question of social power. It is on this basis, and this basis alone, that planned production is possible. The separate industrial units, and indeed whole industries, can then be integrated both horizontally and vertically into a single planned whole, whilst all sections compute quite autonomously their share in the total accounting of labor time used up in its various forms, these being essentially wear and tear on machinery, consumption of raw and auxiliary materials, and expenditure of labor. This fundamental ordering and organization of communist production can, and indeed must, be brought into being by the producers themselves, can indeed be established by them alone. The association of free and equal producers then becomes an absolute necessity. The system of interlocking relations and mutual interdependence grows from below precisely because the producers themselves, in their own right, have control over management and administration. Now the necessary scope has been created to allow for the initiative of the producers themselves to be expressed, who are thereby able to create the moving and developing forms needed by social life in all their thousandfold forms. Footnote 19. Paragraph ending, quote, who are thereby able to create the moving and developing forms needed by social life in all their thousandfold forms, end quote. How clearly the advent of modern computerization techniques has highlighted the simple practicability of such a system. Indeed, it may be said that, at least as far as the technical basis of control over production is concerned, the era of the computer represents the dawn of the era of communism. And footnote continuing. It is the proletariat itself which lays in place the foundation stone cementing the basic relationship between producers and the product of their labor. This and this alone is the key question of the proletarian revolution. In just the same way as the feudal serf struggled in the bourgeois revolution for his piece of land and for the full right of disposal over the fruits of his labor, In the same way, the proletariat now struggles for control of the factories and other industrial establishments, and for full right of disposal over production, an outcome which is only possible if the fundamental relationship between producer and product has been fought to its final conclusion in a new social legality. The decisive question at issue here is precisely that of the place the proletariat is to win for itself in society. The question as to whether, along with the right to labor in the workplaces, the right of disposal over the products of these workplaces is also achieved, or, on the contrary, whether the proletariat is once again to be pronounced incapable of discharging responsibility, and leaders, experts, and scientists are to be entrusted with that right of disposal. In the final instance, this struggle will be fought out against those who believe that they are destined, after the revolution, to assume responsibility on behalf of the proletariat. It is for this reason that the cooperation of such people is only appropriate if the foundations of communist production have first been laid. It is this basis alone that their skills may work for society, whereas otherwise they can develop only into a new ruling caste. The so-called dictatorship of the proletariat suppresses everything which opposes the ruling administration until all branches of production have become sufficiently quote-unquote mature as to be integrated by their respective supreme management bodies into the general structure of power and administration. In the case of the Association of Free and Equal Producers, workers' rule serves the purpose of introducing and carrying through the new system of production, accounting and regulation on the basis of average social labor time as the general foundation of all production, and in order to create the basis on which the free producers themselves may control production and administer it. In the case of state capitalism, and the other hand, the general conditions are such as will create the strongest machinery of suppression under the control of a central apparatus. In the case of the system of freely associating producers, its functions so as to bring to life and to promote those very forces through which it itself as the function of rule progressively loses power, in order finally to make itself superfluous. Workers' rule works so as to bring about its own demise at the earliest possible historical moment. Without concerning ourselves further with state capitalism, we should far rather now proceed to examine how it comes about that any quote-unquote reasonable person at this present historical juncture may still embrace and adhere to the naive conception of Marx, who is supposed to have derived this out of the liberal anarchist tendencies of this time. Footnote 20. Ich genau die Marxische Geschichtsgesellschaft und Staatstheorie, Band 1, The Marxist Theory of History, Society, and the State, Volume 1, page 309. And footnote continuing, which held that the regulation of economic life should come, quote, about not through the state, but through a union of the free associations of the socialist society, end quote, in which the fundamental category of economic life should be the average social hour of labor. Indeed, over and above all this, it is necessary to take steps to ensure that this naive conception of Marx is shown to be the sole possible foundation upon which communism might be achieved. To pose the question in this way means simultaneously to declare that this conception was not, in the first place, born behind a writing desk, but was itself the product of a seething, developing revolutionary life activity. So far as it is possible for us to look back upon events in review, we may count 3 decisive moments which marked our disillusionment with the sycophantic hymns chanted by the communist economists. The first was the spontaneous development and functioning of the Soviet system. The second, the disarming of the Soviets by the Russian state apparatus. And the third and final moment of disillusionment of the growth of state-administered production into a new, hitherto unknown form of rule over the whole of society. These facts compelled us to undertake a closer examination, an examination which revealed that state capitalism, in both theory and practice, has absolutely nothing in common with Marxism. At the same time as social life itself, through its definite expression, social practice has, in the form of the workers' councils, the Soviet system, impelled Marx's concept of the association of free and equal producers into the forefront of history. That same social life, with its objective criticism of theory and practice, has simultaneously given the actual power in society to state capitalism.